Well, good afternoon. Ivo WUBBELS is my name. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Engine Software. Engine Software is a game developer based here in Holland. Today I want to discuss publishers when it comes to indie developers. We have been working in the game industry for over 20 years, and we are now the oldest game developer still in business in the Netherlands, and we're kind of proud of that. But in all those years we had to do a lot with publishers, so right now I think I want to share this information about working with publishers all those years and how it changed, to give you an idea of how can you benefit from working for a publisher if that's working out for you, and then hopefully you can decide if it's interesting for you to do that or absolutely not. So a brief introduction about Engine Software. It was started in the early 90s, and right now we're about 15 people in the office. Traditionally, Engine Software worked mostly on Nintendo platforms. We started on working Game Boy Advance game titles early in the 90s, and it evolved to the latest iteration of Nintendo platforms. Right now we're doing games for any platform, from iOS to PlayStation 4, whatever it is, Vita, everything. We covered everything. I think we developed at least one game for each platform there is out now currently, so that's pretty cool. In all those years we did a lot of games for bigger publishers and IP holders like Marvel, Disney. We worked on movie licenses, which is a complete different approach of game development, and I want to tell you a bit more about that later. Currently what we're doing is we're working with indie developers to bring their games to different platforms. One of the major titles that we did last year is that we brought the hit title Terraria from PC Steam to the consoles and Vita, which sold already more than 2.5 million copies so far I know recently. And on that side we'll bring the game to way more new platforms, so that's really interesting. But also we're working on more smaller titles that are niche titles, popular indie titles, and we'll bring them to a broader audience, and we'll announce more of that pretty soon. Okay, so actually our company started as an indie developer early in the 90s as well. And normally it's not that interesting to tell you a bit more about that, but here maybe it is today. So actually when we started creating games for the MSX computer. I'm not sure if anybody knew that, just an idea? How many? Only 2? 3? Boy, I'm getting old. But the MSX computer was a computer in the 80s. I think it was, the first version was launched in 83, something like that. It was a very simple computer. It had an only 3 megahertz processor. Compare that to whatever we have now. We had only 64 kilobytes of memory. When we did graphics, we had only 16 colors to work with, so it was really simple. It was really a lot of limitations. But at that time we worked something like what they called the demo scene. It was a group of kids. Actually we were still kids, like 15, 16 years old, still in high school. But we wanted to create games or to show what we could do in the computer. And well, that started more like a hobby. Can we create a game? At that time it was not common to create games. People told me always, creating games, that's something they do in Japan, and people don't do that in Europe. But well, we have proven that that's different, and right now it's pretty common. But back at those days, it was really special if you told somebody, I'm doing computer games. They didn't understand that. To give an idea how that worked as an indie developer at that time, well, we created our games when at school. So I think quite some indie developers do the same, still working at school, and then at night time create the game till very late at night and all the weekends programming and doing art and stuff. It's not, at that time, it's not really different than what it's doing right now. But bringing the games to an audience was completely different from now. I mean, now it's simple. We have internet, which is a great way to communicate, but it didn't exist at that time, or at least it was not a platform that we could use. So what we had to do at that time was, when we created a game, they were sold on floppy disks. We had to copy the floppy disk by hand, so all night just copying floppy disks. We had to create our own packages. We just ordered a few hundred boxes, photocopied a cover, put it together, and brought it to a fair, which was done a few times a year. And then at such a day, we were able to sell maybe 100 copies of the game, and then we did 200. We were really happy. But yeah, that was really fun to do. It was a great time, but actually it was nothing to make a real living of course. So well, at that time we decided, okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to go into the real business area instead of creating games? But then we decided, well, let's give it a shot. Why shouldn't we try to create games for a living? So that's what we did in the 90s. Then we actually started, the first game that we tried to make was on the Super NES for Nintendo. Right now it's really easy for a developer to work for games for Nintendo. You just apply for us being a developer, and within a week or something you get access to all the tools and stuff. At that time we had to write a document of, I think, 50, 60 pages explaining why we want to do games, how we want to do that, how we want to do that financially, and all the stuff like that. We had no clue. We just tried to figure out something, and we just wrote something down, hoping that Nintendo would approve that. And after a few iterations, we were really happy that we got that developer license. That was really special for us in those days. So then, yeah, you could start creating games. There was nothing like middleware or whatever what we have now. So all what we had to do was from scratch. There was even, most of the programming at the early days was even done in assembly programming. So it was really something completely different than what we do right now. But when we were creating the games, there was one place to sell the games in the 90s, which was the ECTS, which was something like the E3 of those years. It was in London. It was really probably the best shows we ever had in the games industry. It's really sad that they don't exist anymore. I'm not sure if everybody ever heard about ECTS. A few, yeah, but I think you agree those were the great shows of the old days. At that time, it was publishers were looking for really great games for developers, so there was nothing like only a few AAA games that were sold well. You could sell any kind of game if you convince a publisher. It was really a different way that publishers work right now. If you had a great idea, you was able to convince a publisher that was good that your game was really good, and then, well, you could create a contract with it at the same night in the bar for even a few $100,000 or even $1 million. And it was created, well, in a bar. It happened at that time. So it's completely different from what's now. So if there was a great idea, yeah, it was really easy to get money, but you had to convince the publishers first. The self-publishing at that time didn't really exist. It was almost impossible to do that, especially when console was the main way of publishing your titles. You had to publish them and sell them in stores, and well, at least buying the cartridges was way too expensive for indie publishing. So that was something that didn't work. You had to work with a publisher. Well, right now everything is going to the digital. As we know, the first digital platforms like the XBLA and iTunes, they all came in the mid-2000s. I remember the days before that when it just came up, everybody said it's 1 or 2 more years and then the retail business is gone. I think only at currently that is happening, so it's almost more than 10 years later that we see that the major distribution of software is digital. Until 2010, the biggest money was still made in the retail, and right now, well, especially the last, I think, a year and a half, retail is really having a tough time. So the new publishers came out. That's the publishers that we all know. Chilingo was one of the first the first digital publishers that really stood out, but also like Big Fish and Spill Games, they are known to be the new kind of publishers that came out recently. But also there were quite a lot of publishers that used to be retail publishers, and they tried to make a living off digital as well. Some of them succeed, many just tried to do that, but what they did is they tried their traditional philosophy of working with retail, working with bringing the games this way to the market, to the digital space, and that's a complete different way of working. And many of those publishers failed, but still some are trying to make that change. And it's really important to be aware of that if you work with them and they are not sure how to handle the markets, it could you even bring into troubles than help you out. So if you look at the publishers, originally the retail publishers, what they had to do, they invested in the development. That was one of the major things to work with a publisher. Most of the games were all financed by publishers, which was good for a developer because you just know what money you would get to create a game. If the game was a success, you would probably get some extra upfront money. So that was really interesting. But it was also, there were quite some pitfalls. If you work with a certain budget and your game is only halfway done when the budget is gone, you have a serious problem. And that was traditionally the biggest problem of developers. They worked with a publisher, they had only a budget for creating the game, but they were not able to manage that well. And yeah, many projects failed because of this problem between handling the budget between the developer and the publisher. The traditional retail publishers also had to invest in the costs of goods. For instance, if you have to buy your Nintendo goods or your PlayStation 3 final boxed products, they cost $5 to $6 each. That's including fees for Nintendo. If you want to sell 100,000 copies, yeah, you have to spend more than $500,000 before you even have made any money. And then if you don't sell them and you get them back, the problem for the publisher is even bigger. So the investing in cost of goods was the big risk of the publishers when it came to retail. Retail publishers traditionally did all of the marketing. Right now marketing is all online, of course, but when going back a couple of years, it was like magazines and where the marketing was done. Television, which is still in some way the case. The marketing expenses at those times were huge compared to what we have to do right now. For a publisher with a good financial backup, it was possible to do that, but for a developer, it was way too expensive to do that. And of course, retail publishers did have to do the distribution to all the stores, which is, well, the biggest task what they had to do, and that's something that doesn't work, that we don't have to do right now in the digital area. The digital publishers, I say it sometimes invest in development, sometimes invest in the QA, and sometimes do invest in marketing. That's basically what you would expect for a publisher. But what we see right now is publishers pretend to be a digital publisher, but they only want to take the income and they don't want to invest. And that's one of the biggest problems if you want to work with a publisher. Publisher needs to do something to publish your game, and that's important to understand. So if you want to work with a publisher, the good thing is you can have it financed, which means you have a financial backup for your development. Publishers may have good marketing channels because they do that's all that they do. And if a publisher has a good marketing channel, you can take advantage of that. If you work with a publisher, you can just focus on development and learn from the experiences from the publishers. That's the good thing. But there are also negative sides of working with the publishers. A publisher, especially when they invest, they want to have some saying in what you're doing, so your creative freedom for development is limited. They want their ideas, what they think is important, so you have to discuss that with them. You have to be aware that they are a party as well. And of course, a publisher takes part of the money, and the big question is, the money that they take, is it worth working with them? And that's where the tricky part is. If you decide to do this and work with a publisher, the most important parts to consider, you have to be a team. If you see your publisher as another party, it's really difficult to work at, well, like the good and the bad side. You have to work together. Only if you work together to make money together, only then it works. If you don't approach it that way, you will probably fail in your project most of the times. When working with a publisher, it's important to protect your own IP. Of course, everybody say you have to protect your IP, but your IP is only something, is worth something if the game is successful. So until there is a huge number of players, your IP isn't worth anything, but you have to be aware of that for the long term. And publishers are aware of that as well, so they want to have a share in your IP. Probably you have to consider that. What you have to do is you make to have sure your project is important for the publisher. If a publisher has 5 projects and they invest in 3, and in your they don't invest, and they want to bring all to the market, which one is most important for them to make most successful? The one that they invested in most. So if they didn't invest in your project, what's the reason for them to make money? If they have to share their money between projects, you have to make sure that they choose your game to be the most important to bring to the market. It's really important. And if you want to do that, you have to think like a publisher. If you work with a publisher, what's their goal? Try to read their minds. How do they look at a project? They invest something, but they don't know what they will get. There is a risk for them as well. Be aware of that. You have to make sure that you understand how they think about the investment they make, and only if you do that together, like a team, then it really can work. And in the end, if a publisher is able to help you grow your audience, make more money, it's really a simple statement. I think it's better to get a little bit of 1 million rather than only most of $1,000. So if a publisher can help out bringing a game to a bigger audience, making more revenue, then a smaller share can be in the end more money. So that's where you have to be, that's the decision you have to make. So I think I have to finish up quickly. I run through this last slide. Right now we said the traditional publishers from the 80s, we have the digital publishers right now, but how will that be in the future? What we think, if you look now, free to play, well, that's where a lot of people are looking into. Will that remain popular? I'm not so sure. What we think is the monetization now is difficult. Something will change in the next couple of years, but we don't know what direction it's going. Maybe it's something like a Netflix type of solution. We don't know, but there will be something different probably. What we see right now, retro games are really popular. I said how we created games as indie developer in the 90s is most like how the indie developers at those days work. So it looks like we have to come to a full circle. It seems things go around. Everything that happened in the past will happen again. So what we think is within a couple of years there will be some big new parties that stand up with new monetization strategies, being the new publisher of the next era, and they will probably be dominating the games industry. I'm not sure that it will happen, but I really think something like that will happen, and if that's something like a Netflix type of service, something like that, it could be. But we have to be aware of where it's going. But what we think is, if you say we do it all alone, or we have to decide to work with a publisher, that we think in the long term, the publishers will be important again for us as being an indie developer. So we have to be aware of that and take advantage of that. Oh. So that was all I wanted to say today. I think a few minutes late. If you have a few questions, shoot or ask later after this.
Hello, my name is Ola.
Hello.
Yeah, my question is, so what are your thoughts on something like PlayStation Now and PlayStation Plus, which is a Netflix-like subscription type service?
Yeah, it is what we say. It's an experiment in that way, but it's limited. What we say, for instance, if you look at Nintendo, I think if Nintendo now decides to make like a Netflix service where you can play their full back catalog of all the games they created in the 20 years, it will be a huge success. But on the PlayStation Plus, there is only a limited part that you can do, so it's still limited. You can't play the big Grand Theft Auto for free if you have this license. So it's something in that direction, but I think it's only a first experiment, in my opinion.
Thank you.
No? Okay. Sure.
There was one slide where you were talking about publishers and understanding how to work with publishers. And I know you know
This one?
Yeah. And I know you know this really well, and I was wondering if you could comment on this. When you're working with a person and a publisher, there's certain expectations and intricacies of how publishers work as a corporation. And when you are in development, during the process of development, there are some things that, as an independent developer, you would do differently than actually working with a publisher in order to please the producer and his superiors who are working at the publisher. So I was wondering if you could comment, give some tips to people, because it is an important part of working with the
Yes.
publisher, to please the publisher during the process.
Right. Well, that's basically what I mean by be a team. You have to do it together. You should feel like a team. If you work like, well, this is the publisher, the evil guy there, and if you feel that or if you act that way, it doesn't work. You have to work together. You have to be aware that only then you will succeed. And yeah, maybe their way of working is different than what we as a developer would expect, but you have to understand that. And indeed, sometimes you have to say, okay, I understand this is the way the publisher works. It is important for their part of the business, so we have to follow their rules. I know that I don't want that, but for the big goal, that's the best way to do, so let's do it. You have to do that, of course. So that's limiting your freedom, of course it is. But if the bigger picture is more revenue for you, well, then you have to do that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions?
Okay.
No?
Thank
Thank
you
you
all.
very much, Ivo.
Thank you.